Ambassador Bاترسون, thank you for being with us on CBC.
Thank you, Ms. Hadidi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking you on the most daunting issue currently in Egypt, the situation, the security situation in Sinai. How do you evaluate that, especially after the unfortunate incident of kidnapping some of our soldiers?
Yes, that is very unfortunate, and I'd like to certainly convey my best wishes for their friends and families for their safe return. But let me say, generally speaking, the situation in the Sinai is better than it was a year ago. And I credit a lot of this to the efforts undertaken by the Army in the Sinai. Again, it's still a very dangerous area. There's certainly some jihadi wannabes who are active in the region. Certainly there's a lot of criminality. But I think the situation is marginally better. And it's been greatly aggravated by the flow of arms from eastern Libya. Gaddafi must have had an enormous amount of arms in his country, and it's being smuggled out in all directions. So the security situation in some respects is more challenging.
But do you have an estimate of how much is the smuggled arms or smuggled weapons inside Sinai?
No, but the Army and the Navy have intercepted quite a few weapons, large weapons, offensive weapons coming from eastern Libya through Egypt into the Sinai. And of course we've done some analysis, and the weapons are of superior quality, so the price has dropped and the quality has gone up. Again, it's a problem all over the region, not just for Egypt.
I know you're helping within the military aid, especially with the tunnels, especially with some sensors, with some highly equipped equipment for the tunnels. What is your role within the military aid for that?
Well, for years we've had a very large military assistance program here, and in recent years it's certainly been moving toward issues like border control. The head of the border guard, for instance, just spent 2 weeks in the United States looking at the situation on the Mexican border to see what lessons and equipment he might take from that. But we're sponsoring back scanners, we're sponsoring patrol boats, we're sponsoring equipment that will identify tunnels. So I think our cooperation in this area is growing rather significantly. And again, I think the Egyptian military, given all the challenges that they have out there, has done a pretty good job of at least moving in the right direction.
When we talk about the security situation in Sinai, there's always this discussion about amending the Camp David Security Pact. Did Egypt request any amendment in that?
No, never. And I think most Egyptians realize that the Camp David Accord is not only a centerpiece for Egypt's security, but for the security of the entire region. And when I go to talk to people in our Congress, I'm struck by how many people, young people, don't even remember what it was like before Camp David and how much conflict there was in this area. But I think the Camp David Accords and the multinational force organization, which is active in the Sinai, a huge multinational force, a sizable multinational force, with 15 different countries, has done a very good job of maintaining the peace all these years.
But I'm referring to the security pact that would allow a certain number of our army to be in the C and D areas.
Yes, and that's under constant negotiation and discussion. And there's frankly a very flexible and good arrangement called the Agreed Procedures that's handled by the Multinational Force Organization that provides for changes in this, and they have been changed over time.
But Egypt did not ask for the amendment of the security pact.
It's a constant process where they evaluate different types of equipment, different force levels throughout these zones, and it's a constant process that's always underway.
On the other side, at the Congress, we always hear some loud voices asking for limiting the military aid to Egypt, stopping the military aid to Egypt. How loud are these voices? How effective on the administration?
Well, let me be clear. The administration's position across many decades is to oppose, without question, any restrictions on assistance to Egypt. So the administration has opposed and will oppose any restrictions on military assistance to Egypt. And just this week, General Richard Clark, who's head of our military assistance organization, he is working, he's in Washington, he's working with the Congress to try and explain to as many congressmen and senators as possible the value of the U.S. Military relationship with Egypt. I went last week. It's, again, a constant process. There are many new people in our Congress. There are many who are, shall we say, unnerved by some of the publicity surrounding Egypt, who don't understand some of the strategic elements at play here. So we have to educate these people, but again, the administration opposes any restrictions on assistance to Egypt.
That would turn me into the economic assistance.
Right.
There is a pact that has been announced, a package that has been announced first by President Obama after the revolution, and then by Secretary Kerry during his visit, the $190 million that has been granted, then the $260 million that are linked or conditioned to signing the IMF. Why is it conditioned to signing the IMF deal?
Because Egypt needs an economic stabilization program. It needs a program that will provide, so when you put money into Egypt, particularly into foreign exchange, Egypt needs to resolve its subsidy issues, and that's just not going after poor people, because poor people need a safety net. And I think there have been many examples of this. World Bank's been working on this quite some time to develop a safety net for poor people, so rich people and prosperous people can play more. So you need a stabilization program so the money will be well used. Now on the rest of the program, I really regret that we haven't been able to disperse our economic assistance as rapidly as I would like. Some of that is a holdover from the problem with the arrest of the American, or the potential arrest of the American NGO workers over a year ago.
What is the rest of the program? I think there was a $1 billion debt relief. What is the rest?
There's a forced money in the enterprise fund, which we would put $60 million a year, in the hopes that that will generate, and I'm convinced that it will, generate a very considerable amount of private capital for Egypt, because frankly the long-term economic prospects here are terrific. And there are lots of opportunities for Egyptians and Americans to make money working together. And then we're going to announce very shortly a major education initiative, and I don't want to get into that here because we're going to roll it out in the next few months, that will focus on bringing people to the States and then greatly increasing the number of scholarships available here.
In front of the Congress, Secretary Kerry said that any further assistance to Egypt, economic assistance to Egypt, will be conditioned not only to the economic progress but also to the political progress and the political scene. What does this mean?
Well, that's not clear what it means, entirely clear what it means, but what it does mean is that we would expect Egypt and the government of Egypt to act in accordance with its international obligations. But what Secretary Kerry said, I think he said it very effectively in his statement when he released the $190 million and the $60 million that was going to go into the enterprise fund, that he expects economic stabilization and he expects Egypt to work carefully to abide by its international obligations on issues like human rights. Reconciliation, political reconciliation, of course, is important here.
So any other economic assistance from the U.S. will be conditioned to human rights, values, to political process, as Kerry says?
There is a real difference in our system between evaluating the scene on the ground. We do that all the time in our assistance program, and legislative requirements. Again, let me be clear that the administration opposes legislative restrictions on all foreign assistance. So if the IMF agreement is signed, Secretary Kerry and others will take into account the overall situation before they decide to disburse.
Are you helping within the IMF deal or within the IMF signing with Egypt?
We're in constant contact with the IMF. We are the largest shareholder to the IMF, but we have not, and frankly we've been very careful not to get in the middle of Egypt's negotiations with the IMF. Of course, both sides keep us informed, again because we're a large shareholder, but we have been very careful not to get in the middle of that, as have other major donors. So the arrangement is really between the IMF and Egypt, because they've got to come to terms to what would be the most effective and the most practical stabilization program that Egypt can move forward with.
But to your knowledge, as long as you are the main shareholder in the IMF, where are we now? Because we've heard several news. One that was issued a few weeks ago that this will be signed mid-May. We are in the middle of May and nothing has been signed. There is a new government, and the new government says within another month and a half. What is happening?
I think the progress, again, we think this is terribly important that Egypt come to some kind of stabilization program and undertake the fundamental reforms that this economy needs to see. But I do think the IMF negotiations may be stalled for the moment. And they were essentially stalled on the same issue that they've been stalled upon really for the other 3 or 4 times that we've come close to an agreement, and that's on the tax increase. And I understand that raising taxes in an economy like this is hugely challenging, and I understand that any rollback of subsidies is also difficult. So these would be major and are major challenges within our government. But I know that the government and the IMF continue to discuss these issues. I know that the IMF is trying to do everything possible to sort of bring Egypt to the table and discuss how to work around this. But ultimately, it has to be Egypt's homegrown program that they sell to the IMF and to other donors, because the key is not the IMF agreement. The key is the financing that it will unlock from other donors.
So taxes and subsidies.
Taxes and subsidies, and those are tough. Those are tough in the United States, tough in Europe, tough in Egypt.
Do you feel that with the new cabinet, maybe there is, and with elections maybe forecasted sometime October, November, this government, this regime is trying to push those austerity measures or those tough measures after the elections?
Well, let me say that would not be unusual in any political system. I can't speak for the Egyptian government, but let me say that in any political system, it becomes difficult to take hard decisions, particularly that will raise revenue and tax people before an election.
Was Washington pleased with the Qatari money, the $3 billion that came for bonds recently? Do you think that it helps bridging the gap in a very short time? Well,
certainly it helps, because Egypt has a severe foreign exchange shortage, and certainly it helps to provide energy, to import food, to import raw materials, to import spare parts. Yes, it's very important, and it will alleviate some of the immediate pain. But we'd like to see this bridge of the Qatari money and other foreign assistance that's coming in as a bridge to a stabilization program. It's most useful if it provides Egypt some breathing room to negotiate with the IMF, to negotiate with other donors, and to move forward on a stabilization program. If it doesn't do that, it's merely a band-aid for the economy.
A breathing room or a relaxing attitude towards...
Well, that's always a struggle, of course, but it would be most useful, and I'm sure the Qataris have conveyed this because they are very interested in stabilizing Egypt too, that it's most useful if it leads to some kind of stabilization program. But of course, it's certainly been useful, and it'll be useful this summer.
How do you evaluate the performance of the Ikhwani regime or Morsi's regime within the different governments since he took power on the economic file, to start with?
Well, it's not up to me to evaluate their economic performance. Again, like all international donors, the United States wants to see a stabilization program because, again, there are huge opportunities here. We have investors come in, we have people, American companies, most of them are making money hand over fist here. They're extremely profitable. So the long-term opportunities for economic growth and job creation are simply terrific. So we want to see Egypt sort of get over this hump. And there are certainly enormous economic challenges with unemployment and foreign exchange shortages, but it's not up to me to evaluate the economic performance of the government. It's up to Egyptian citizens.
Yes, but you are involved with every tiny detail. I mean, you are the U.S. ambassador, you're involved, and you meet a lot of the old cabinet, the new cabinet, so you must have your own perception.
There are huge structural problems in this economy, huge structural problems that haven't been dealt with for years. And at some point, it's going to be difficult to tear down the subsidy program to provide a safety net for poor people. That is absolutely urgent here, and we've been having discussions with the World Bank about this. So for any government, it would have been extremely hard to do this. But it's very difficult.
Egypt and Iran has been getting closer recently. And let me take again the economic side. There has been a visit of the Iranian Assistant Oil Minister. Is Egypt allowed to import oil from Iran?
Iran is under international sanctions, and Egypt has always been assiduous in observing international law. These are UN sanctions, and they have the force of international law. And to me, it would be inconceivable that Egypt would break sanctions, violate international law to purchase Iranian oil.
How do you evaluate with the Egyptian request that came up during Dr. Morsi's visit to Russia of help within the nuclear file?
Well, again, Egypt is a signatory to the NPT. The NPT, and Egypt has always been assiduous in observing its international obligations. We have American companies. We have a commercial interest in this. We have American companies that will be interested in selling peaceful civilian nuclear power to Egypt when and if they make a tender for this. So, of course, this is okay. The use of civilian nuclear power is provided for in the NPT as long as the safeguards provisions are observed.
But I mean, you're not worried about getting help from Russia and not from the United States?
Absolutely not. As long as the safeguard provisions and the provisions of the NPT are observed. And again, we will want to compete with the Russians in selling civilian nuclear power to Egypt.
My last question on the economic file is on wheat. Egypt is a major importer of wheat from the United States, but there is an Egyptian policy that has been disclosed lately of expanding the homegrown wheat. How does this affect the imports? How much did we import from the U.S., for instance?
So far this year it's been 1.7 million tons, and we're always the second or third seller, usually after Russia and Ukraine. I think probably after Russia this year. It may reduce our exports to Egypt slightly, but what most Egyptians care about is will there be enough food and enough bread on the shelves. And it looks to us like there will be. A combination of imports, a combination of domestic production, and it looks to us like there'll be sufficient foreign exchange to fill any gap with imports.
Ambassador, we'll take a short break here, and then we will move to the most difficult file, which is the political file. فاصل قصير ونواصل هذا الحوار، والجزء القادم هيكون عن العلاقات السياسية.